Hi, I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, and we're here with Miriam Delicado, and she's got a website called alienbluestar.com, and she's got a very interesting story to tell. She's a contactee, and she has a special relationship with the Hopi and the Mayan peoples, as we will see as we go forward. Hi, Miriam. How are you today?
Very well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Carrie.
Absolutely. It's a real pleasure. I've read your book. It's a wonderful book. And why don't you just start at the beginning, whatever feels comfortable, and tell the people your story, and let's go from here.
Okay. To start, it's a very, very big story, and it's difficult for me to be able to convey to people the story of my life, which is what I tried to do a little bit in my book, Blue Star, is give people an overview of many of the things that have happened to me. I've had a very interesting past 20 years of my life, where I've had numerous contacts with extraterrestrials from other places. And often people have asked me where it is that these beings are from, and that's a very big question. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But to give the viewers an overview, my life started out very strange right from the very beginning. And my life was not an ordinary one when I was growing up. I first started to notice that I was different probably when I was about 2 years old. And I actually have memories that could take me all the way back to being a baby, as well as most of my remembering came back to me when I was about 2. So when I was probably about 9 years old, my psychic abilities started to kick in, and numerous strange things started to happen to me. I was having very vivid dreams and all sorts of things along those lines that I really couldn't explain. I used to play this little game when I was a child about watching the people in the car as I was driving past them in a car, and I would try to think of what they were saying or thinking in their heads. And when I did that, it was fascinating to me, some of the things that I would hear them thinking about. But at the same time, I was always scared that they would know that I was, probing into their minds. And I never wanted to get caught doing that. So that's a very, very clear memory for me ever since I was very, very young. It's not something that I do now. It's not something that I do consciously ever at any point, because, of course, I would have to ask someone's permission in order to do that. So right from the very beginning, I was a little bit different. And as my life moved forward, these abilities of mine just became stronger and stronger. And by the time I was a teenager, I was doing all sorts of things. I was having dreams that were prophetic in to use terms that people would understand. I saw a number of visions that actually came true within a very short period of time. And I also had encounters with sort of beings that I wasn't clear with where they were from or what focus they were, where they came from. And it was really unnerving for me growing up, because even though I knew that my father had some sort of abilities as well, I wasn't close enough to him to be able to talk to him about it. And that made my earlier years very difficult, just for that reason alone. Now, my father was an interesting character in my life, because he seemed to possess certain abilities as well. And when we were kids, we were always, a little bit nervous around him, thinking that he would always know what we were doing. So when jumping way forward into my life, into the year 1988, which is 20 years ago, it was interesting when I did have this encounter on the highway in northern British Columbia with extraterrestrials. And this was a physical encounter that took place that changed my entire life. But when it happened, it was almost immediate that I knew that my father had had contact. Simply because a number of the things that I was told by these beings, my father used to talk about when we were kids all the time, about how the world would eventually change and how we needed to learn how to survive and what it is that we needed to do, this type of thing. So I always knew that he'd had contact. And
didn't he also work for the, an agency, secret, in intel in some capacity?
Not that I'm aware of.
Well, because you talk about him being approached, and he also warned you about being approached at some point. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And how do you know that unless, you've been approached?
That was a very interesting story that my father used to tell me as a child. It was a fascinating story that always, made me really nervous, and I had no clue as to what he was talking about. So what I need to do is step forward past 1988. It was a couple of years later, and I was working in a little yogurt shop. And this is a really fascinating piece to this puzzle for my life. And even I myself am still to this day made a little bit weary of it. So the year was, a couple of years after 1988, and I was working in this yogurt shop, and I was just having a normal day, or I was trying to. And this man walked past the window of the shop, and he looked directly at me into my eyes. And when he did, he came right in the door, walked right up to me, looked me straight in the eye, and he said, "Do you work for the CIA or the FBI?" And I said, "No, I don't." And immediately this rush came over me, and I thought, oh, this is it. And he said, "Have you ever worked for the CIA or the FBI?" And of course, I'm 22 years old. I don't want to have anything to do with this. I'm thinking, why is this happening to me? I said, "No, I haven't." And then he proceeded to tell me, he said, "Have you ever thought about working for the Russians?" And of course I said, "Absolutely not." And he then proceeded to tell me how the Russians had been working with people like myself for a very long time, and that if I joined them, that I would never be alone again, that I would be surrounded with people that were like me. And I said I was not interested. And what he was talking about was a psychic program. And he said that this psychic program had been going on for a very long time. And of course I knew all about this. And I very nicely, politely, with a smile on my face, looked at this man and said that I was not interested. And he kept pushing and saying, do you know how strong you are? And I smiled at him. I said, "Yes, I do know how strong I am." And he said, "But can you control your abilities?" And I said, "Actually, I can." And then he said that they would still be very much interested in working with me. And I told him that there was no way. I said, "What I would like you to do is go back to the people that sent you here, thank them very much for their interest, and tell them that there's no point in ever coming back because I will never be interested." So what makes this fascinating is that as a child growing up, my father on numerous occasions had told me a story of him being on the streets of Paris during the war, because of course he's from Europe, and how a man approached him. And what my father said was that they asked him to become part of the psychic army, the Russian psychic army. And he kept saying to me, "If they ever come to you, do not go with them. Do you understand? Don't ever go with them, because if you do, they will own you. You can't run and you can't hide because they will find you with their minds." And so, of course, I was always very frightened by this, and it didn't make any sense to me growing up. But in that moment, as soon as the man walked into the store and said, "Do you work for the CIA or the FBI?" I knew exactly who he was, what he was there to ask me, and I was very adamant that I was not interested. And I'm not interested for anyone to do something along those lines.
Okay, yeah, I remember that story from your book, and I think it's a real bell ringer. I think your father had maybe Native American blood in somewhere in there. He's certainly got I don't know, European. What would you say your background is, just in terms of genetics, I guess?
My mother is German, and as far as I know, all the way back, she's German. My father is Yugoslavian, and as far as I know, his family history going far, like way, 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 way back, I believe that there's some interesting blood there. But for me to say anything for certain would not be fair to him or to anyone, because I am not sure. But as far as Native American blood goes, no, I don't believe that there is. But with his bloodline, if there's anyone interested in looking it up, that would be able to go very far back, meaning, you know, even thousands of years, I think that it would be fascinating to see where it led.
So let's go to your incident in 1988. Is that, and tell a little bit more about that, you know, kind of capsulated, if you will.
In 1988, I was living a very normal, average life as a young adult. I just moved from a small town into the big city in Vancouver, British Columbia. And my friends and I had decided to take a road trip to my hometown. And on the way up, everything was normal. We took the drive and everything was fine. But on the return journey, everything changed. There were four of us, four adults and a young child in the car. And the trip, we were driving for hours. I was sleeping in the back seat of the car. And then it started to get dark out. The people that were driving wanted a break, so they went into the back seat, and I went up into the front in the passenger side with my friend. And right away, these big balls of light that looked like truck lights, actually, that's what we thought that they were for the longest time, came streaming up behind us rather quickly in the car. And as that happened, we were wondering why they were traveling so fast. Now, these particular lights followed us for hours and hours in the darkness, and every time we came up to a car or any kind of house or buildings at all, the lights would fall back and disappear. So after hours of this going on, eventually we went through a town where we thought for sure that we had lost the lights. And as soon as we got to the other side of this town, into the forested area, absolute moment, we said, okay, we're clear. There's no way they can catch up with us. And literally in the blink of an eye, there they were, these balls of light that were probably about this big. And they came up behind us, and then poof. And at this point, after hours, they had been appearing and disappearing, appearing and disappearing, and in the blink of an eye. So my friend got very, very nervous, as I did. Neither one of us were comfortable with what was happening at all. And the people in the back seat were still sleeping. So all of a sudden I screamed at her and I said, pull over the car right now. It's not you they want, it's me. And I went to grab the steering wheel to pull her over, when all of a sudden she just sort of flopped, you know, like a Raggedy Ann doll, and flopped her head over and started pulling over and stopped at the side of the road. And by that time the car filled with light from every direction, and these balls of light were sitting behind the car. So at that point, I was the only one conscious at that time. And when I turned from the back of the car to the front, I saw a craft on the road. Now I couldn't make out any detail because it looked almost misty and very, very bright. And these beings that were about 4 feet tall were walking towards me. They were very androgynous, almost childlike in their nature. And they had big, round black eyes. They didn't have any oval eyes at all. These were round black eyes. And they were directing me to get out of the car, which I did, and I was very scared. I wasn't terrified, though, and that distinction needs to be made. I was not terrified. I was scared. So I got out of the car. They led me down the highway a little bit. And at this point, I wasn't even thinking about my friends. I was just wondering where they were taking me. And on this embankment on the left, they led me up the embankment where I saw, when I looked up, a larger craft that had two beings standing in this doorway. And they had blonde hair, and I mean blonde as in snow white hair, and the most brilliant blue Mediterranean water, blue eyes that you've ever seen, and quite incredible. And the beings, the short ones, took me to the craft, and when I got to the doorway, I walked on board the craft. But what was interesting was that just prior to all of this happening, I'd had a dream in the back seat of the car, and in this dream that I had, this man and woman told me, they said, "We are coming for you soon. Do not be afraid. We are your friends. We are your family. Do not be afraid." And then when I saw these two tall beings, the moment that I laid eyes on them, I said in my mind, "What are you doing here? Why can't you just leave me alone?" And then I walked on board the craft.
And did you have any memories of what happened on the craft at that point?
From the moment I walked off that craft, I had very clear memories. And I have had those clear memories for 20 years.
Clear memories of what happened on the craft, or just clear memories up to the point you've told us?
Both. Once I was on board the craft, I remember a great deal of what happened to me. I do not by any means remember the full 3 hours. I don't. And I don't know if I ever will or not, because up to this point, I mean, I have not had hypnosis done to recover memories. So that's a very important point for me to make to anyone watching, is that these memories have come from conscious memories. So in other words, I walked onto the craft. I had this encounter. It took me some time, but I did come to realize that it was a total of 3 hours, and it was very clear math that I did to work this out. So there was 3 hours of missing time. And I remember quite a bit of the information that they gave me at that time. There were things that have stayed with me so clearly that even as I'm looking at you, I can still see the images in my mind every time I hear about,
Can you give us an idea what was conveyed to you at that time? And does that have something to do with what you're doing here now, visiting Sedona and Hopi land, the Four Corners area?
It has everything to do with it. 20 years ago, I was given messages, and these messages and information that I was given was so crystal clear to me that 2 days after I walked off the craft, I had a clear understanding of all of my psychic abilities and where they came from and how I had them and why I had them. I had a great understanding of my father that I've never had before in my life. I knew that he'd had contact. I had a clear understanding that there were many other people in the world that were like myself, and that all of these things were related. And after 2 days, I started writing quite a bit of this down. I did not by any means write it all down, but there were key points that I did put on paper. Now, at the time, even with some of them, I did not understand the full extent of what it was and this information. But it was about the Four Corners area as being, quote, one of the safe lands in what they termed the end times, if these end times came, in the form that they were giving warnings about. So they gave me warnings about possible futures in which the planet could potentially have destruction. And the people could potentially have a very difficult time. Now, these warnings were just possibilities. but they were things that they had made very clear to me, crystal clear to me, that humanity had a choice in whether or not we were going to end up on this destructive path or a positive path. So many of these things were told to me 20 years ago. But getting into it a little bit deeper, they also told me a great deal about the Four Corners area in particular. So, of course, I did not, at that time, as I was still trying to process all of this information, truly understand what it was that they were saying. How this particular area was a safe land, and how at this time there were certain people that would gather together in this area. The Four Corners area is a really important area to these beings, and it is because it is one of the center points on the earth where gatherings will take place for many people. And it does not necessarily mean that everyone needs to pack up and leave and go to the Four Corners area because it's a safe land. What it means is that even if an individual travels through the area, they are going to be able to have information coming to them within their own selves in order to assist them and help them to know where it is they need to be on the planet. If there is a great cataclysm that does take place, there are certain areas on the earth that will be in safe zones. But that doesn't mean that you're going to be able to go there and be taken care of. What it means is that these areas will not have that great destruction, but it still will be in chaos. So that needs to be clarified to everyone, and that there are these particular safe spots and safe lands all over the earth. Now, the indigenous people all over the earth have known these things for thousands of years, and they are the ones that have all of this knowledge as to where all of these particular areas are. And if we take a look at their myth stories, we are going to be able to find that information. And at the same time, this has been guarded by them for thousands of years, so that if we needed the information, it would be made public for everyone. So it's really important. The Hopi, as well as others on the planet, play a part in this. Now, there needs to be some very clear understanding here about what I'm going to say, because I do have friends that are in Hopi, and I have talked to people there, but by no means at all am I a spokesperson for them, do I speak on their behalf whatsoever. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my experience with you. I'm not going to talk about Hopi. I'm going to share my experiences that revolve around them.
Maybe you can tell us where the link up came. You were told by these beings in 1988 somehow. I assume this is when you were also told to come to Hopi at some point. There was also some kind of I don't know if it was a stone or a necklace or something that you had and you buried in your backyard. Do you want to share that story before we kind of move into the bigger picture?
Yes. The relationship between these beings and the Hopi, for example, again, this is only from my experiences, and it's fascinating. Even to me, it's fascinating. When I was on board the craft, I was sitting in what I call a light chair, and it was, you could look at it just like this, except instead of it being a chair, it was made from pure light. So it almost glowed. And I sat in this chair and I looked across the room, and I had a being on either side of me. And a screen popped up, and the screen was actually quite large. It was probably about this, quite as large as the chair, and 2 or 3 feet high. And as I looked at the screen, there was information that came across it, and images. And these images would be accompanied by information that was given to me by these beings, either through telepathy or meaning they would directly speak to me, or it felt like they were just, there was a constant flow of information being sort of placed within my mind. Now, one of the things that they shared with me was the creation of man. And this is very much related to the Hopi and all of the indigenous people and ourselves. So, to make this story really short, they explained that they had a hand in creating mankind, but by no means were they God. That they were the helpers of this earth to ensure that that they were overseers, so that they would be here to watch over the earth, to help man become more than what they currently are. So, in the beginning, life was created, but nothing came of it. So it's like saying that they threw the seeds of life across the land just to see what would come up. And the idea was that that a vessel would be made so that the sparks of life, us, could then enter and experience life in this world. But nothing ever came of it. In the second world, they gave this life more form, but still thought that it would evolve into something more. And again, nothing of any real value was produced. In the third world that they created, and again, these are the things that were shown and told to me. And in the third world, they said that the form, meaning our bodies, were created. And then our souls would come into the bodies, and when they did, we had all of this knowledge, we had all of this ability to communicate with one another, we had telepathy, we had an understanding far beyond what we currently do right now. But it was like giving children matches to play with, without allowing them to evolve more along the lines of emotionally, and to being able to handle all of this knowledge. So they kind of went crazy. They played around too much. They were becoming destructive. And the things that they did were very dark and evil at that point. So again, the world was sort of cleaned out, cleaned off, and again, these new vessels were created, meaning the vessels that we have now. So there's been a slow evolution of, quote, mankind over time. As this took place, one of the things that happened was, in this third world, I was shown an image of these people, and it was sort of like looking from above. And I looked down into this room, and I saw these people. And these people, I was told, were living the life that was intended, which was the spiritual life. And so, because they had this great knowledge, and because they had a true understanding of why they were here, and the bodies that they had seemed to be doing very well, they were spared and taken from the third world and brought into this, the fourth world. Now, one of the things that happened in this vision is I was told that one day I would find these people and I would know what to do. So when I went into the Four Corners area for the very first time in 2003, I knew I had to go through Hopi, but I really didn't know why. The only thing I knew was that there was a reason for this, and it was a very big reason, and it was very, very important. So when I did go through Hopi, I had what I would call a psychic flash, where I saw some of these Hopi people, and they changed right in front of my eyes. And it was in this flash that I had all of the visions that were given to me on board the craft, as well as what they wanted me to do, as well as what was happening on the earth, where we came from, where we're going. It was just mind-blowing. It was so much. But most important, I realized that these were the people that they wanted me to find. I realized that the Hopi were these individuals that were taken, individuals meaning people that were taken from the third world into the fourth world, and that they had a great purpose at this time. So it was no surprise to me that I came across them at all. And their role on the planet is very important for the future of everyone. It is my hope, and I hope with my heart, that all of us, meaning the Hopi, the indigenous from all around the world, and everyone else that has an understanding and a caring and a passion and a desire to help this planet, will truly come together and be able to save us from this destructive path that I was shown.
You came to Hopi, though, and it was an interesting sort of series of events that put you there, and then also, and I don't know, this may encompass beyond 2003, but your experience of meeting, and I don't know his name, he's a Hopi elder, I believe, and you ended up staying at his house. Do you want to tell a little of that story? Because it's really compelling in the sense that here you are, a complete stranger, a white woman, walking into this tribal setting, and in some strange way they seem to have accepted you and welcomed you in.
In 2004, I took a trip again by myself. And during this particular journey, I knew before I even went there what was going to happen. And I was very nervous. On the first trip, I bought a ring at a little store and in Hopi. And I went back there in 2004 and talked to the woman that sold me the ring. And I was trying to tell her some of these things that had happened to me. And the way that I talked about it was, I kept telling her, I had these visions or I had these dreams, and this is how I came to all this information. And she was really taken aback by the things that I was saying. And she said to me, I think you should speak to one of our elders. So she hummed and hawed about who she should send me to. And then she told me, go to this mesa, this is where this person is, this is their name. And I was thinking, oh wow, this is it. I knew this was going to happen. So I go up onto the mesa and I find this man. And he was not very impressed that I was at his door initially. And he was kind of humming and hawing, like, what are you doing here? I can't help you. And I said, no, I'm only here to share this with you. That's it. So I, again, started this amazing story about how I had these visions and dreams about certain things and how I found them to be completely related to Hopi prophecies, and that they weren't just related, they were almost identical in their nature. And the story of their creation story, again, exactly the same as what these tall blonde entities and beings had told me. So I was telling him all of this, and then finally he looked at me and he said, wait a minute, are you talking about, kind of leaned across the table and said, are you talking about aliens? And I thought, oh, it was such a relief. It was such a relief in that moment, because I had to wait for him to bring it up. And I said, yes. And he said, okay, now talk to me. Now tell me the story. So I continued talking to him, and he appeared to understand and know what it was that I was talking to him about. And at that point, after I'd been speaking to him for hours, he looked at me and he said, why are you here? And I said, I'm here to share with you. And he said, no, why are you here? I don't understand. And he was just kind of shaky about it. And I said, well, I'm only here to share this story with you. And he said, I have had people come from all over the world. He has himself, as well as Hopis. They have people come from all over the world. And he said, they come with similar stories, but not like this. He said, all of them come here and they ask me questions, and you haven't asked me a single question. Why? And I said, what could I possibly ask you that I don't already have the answer to? So that made him even more nervous. And it's not because I believe that I have all of the answers. It is because I know that for myself, I don't need a Hopi to tell me something. I know what I need to know, and I'm content with that. Now, what happened after being with him for some time is even more fascinating. Because I left at one point. He asked me to leave because someone came to his home. And I walked out of his house and I walked along the mesa, at which time I started walking towards the Hopi woman's home who sold me the ring. She'd told me where she lived. Her daughter was outside. So I started talking and sitting with her daughter. And very quickly after that, she started speaking Hopi to one of her friends. And I think it was that moment that I said to myself, that's it. There is absolutely not an ounce of questioning left anymore. Because in that moment, she said a word in Hopi that I recognized as being one of the words that these tall blonde aliens spoke to me in. And I asked the little girl, I said, what does that mean? And she said, it's thank you, saying thank you to a woman in Hopi. And I said, wow, that's amazing. So the two of us were walking around for a little while, and I went in to get a pop from this little place, something to drink. And when I was in this area, I all of a sudden heard in my head, what are you doing here? Very clearly, as if someone was standing right beside me. And when I looked to my right, at this long counter, there standing at the counter was one of these beings. Blonde hair, blue eyes. They were probably about, I don't know, 6'4", built as if they were, been working out for their entire lives, just really, really strong looking. And he stared at me and said, what are you doing here? And I again said, well, I'm coming home. What are you doing here? Why are you asking me, type of thing. And there was no conversation with him, but I knew who he was completely. And I wanted to walk up to him and say, oh, what are you doing here? Let's sit down and talk. But again, I just kept walking with this little girl thinking, no, it's not the right time. So I was walking out of this area, and I said to the little girl, did you see that man in there? Yeah. I said, did you recognize him? She said, no, I've never seen him before. And I said, okay. So I thought, wow, that is so strange. There's something about that I'd like to share that's not in the book, which is fascinating, that has to do with this. But to continue, I went back to this elder's home, and when I did, I said to him, this is what happened when I was with the little girl. I heard this word being said as one of these words that these beings spoke to me in. So there I was, sitting at this elder's table. And out of my back pocket, I pulled out a piece of paper, and I opened it up, and I said, this is the language that they spoke to me in. And I pushed the piece of paper over to him. So he tried to, I said, they're all phonetically written, because I didn't know how to write this. And he said, well, why don't you just tell me what the words are? So I read them out, and as I did, at least 6 of the words on the piece of paper were Hopi. One for sure, I know for sure, is Navajo. And he told me that other words that were on this piece of paper that he thought were Navajo words. So these beings in 1988 when I'd never had any exposure to Hopis or Navajos in any way, shape, or form. So these beings in 1988, when I'd never had any exposure to Hopis or Navajos in any way, shape, or form, as a 22-year-old young girl living a very normal life, these beings spoke to me in a language that I knew for 20 years at this point today. I knew all that time that one day I would find the people whose language this belonged to. I just didn't expect them to be Hopis. I always thought that I'd find them in the jungles of South America or something. So this being that I saw on the mesa, what happened after that trip in 2004 when I returned home was I went for dinner with a friend of mine, and I was telling him all about my journey and that type of thing. We took a drive in his car. Him and his wife were in the front seat, and in the back seat I was sitting behind the driver, and his 9-year-old daughter was to the right of me. So as we're driving down a very busy street in Vancouver, very busy street, one of the major streets, a Jeep rolls up beside the car. And as it does, I looked, and there, sitting in the car, was this blonde being, blonde-haired, blue-eyed being, that was sitting and completely head-cocked to the one side and looking at me directly without looking at the road at all. Didn't look at the road at all. Just sat there and with his head just stared at me. And I thought, no way. That's all I could think. But here's the great thing. The little girl said, "Oh my God, look at that man. He looks so weird. He doesn't even look human." And so everyone in the car just sat back and thought, was quickly trying to, get a glimpse of this man. And so then again, there I was having confirmation by another individual of all of these things. And during a 2-week period after I returned from that trip, I had 3 encounters like that. One in a store, one on the public transit bus, and then the one on in the car with my friends. Very strange. Very, very strange. Even to me, it's fascinating.
Okay. Maybe we could just kind of move ahead now to a little more current and what you've been hearing, and maybe share a little bit about the fact that how you began to come forward, and especially how you got to write your book. Because I have to say that, I came across you via, I think I heard you on a radio show briefly, and then I saw your site, I saw your face, and I knew instantly that we should talk. Mm-hmm. And it was a drawing of your face. It wasn't actually you. Mm. But I just had a connection, and I just knew. But the book, then I got the book, and that just confirmed what I thought. So can you tell me about the writing of the book?
Big question. Very important question, and especially relevant for today. The whole purpose behind writing this book was, first of all, it was a request made by them. So in 1988, when I was on board that craft, I was actually asked by them to do this. They asked me to come forward and share this story, to tell people who they were and where they were from, so that if and when the time came, that if they had to make their presence known on a global scale, that we would not be afraid. So this was very important to them. This was the whole purpose for them sharing the knowledge that they did with me and helping me to try to understand the earth, to understand ourselves, and to understand them. The reason that it was written at this time was, I have to give you a bit of a timeline. In 1988, I had what I call my awakening encounter. And that is the point where everything sort of stems from. I always revert back to 1988 when I'm describing to people what has happened. So I'm told in 1988 all of these things and asked to share them. So I started doing some of these things that they'd asked of me. And then all of a sudden they said, no, 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 stop, 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 stop. Quiet, quiet, quiet. No more talking. And I knew that eventually one day I would be told when the right time was to come forward and start sharing this. So the very beginning of 2003, I was sort of woke up one morning and said, okay, it's time. It's time to go to the Four Corners area. With whatever that meant, I was not sure. But it was time for me to, what I would say, for lack of a better term, to start my work. So that happened in 2003. And after that, of course, encounter with the Hopi elder, and as well as a number of other things that happened prior to that in the Four Corners area that were related to 1988, I said, okay, I must start writing. So the process began. Then in 2007, near the beginning of the year, I had quite a few messages given to me in many different forms. They came to me in dreams, they came to me, you know, in my head saying, you need to finish the book, you need to finish the book, you need to finish the book. And they told me that it was very important that I have it done by November. And I really didn't know why. But they said November 2007, I had to have the book done by, because there was a timeline of what was going to be taking place on the planet. So I pushed and pushed and pushed myself in many ways to be able to have this task completed, which just under the wire I had done. So the book was done, I finished writing it, and then I was told to begin sharing the story with whomever would listen. Now, I was told in 1988 that I was to find the others like myself, and that we were to come together and that these gatherings would begin. Now, they'd given me information, and that again starts to step into what I believe has to do with the indigenous people of the earth, because of what these beings told me. And they said that in the, quote, end times, that there would be many changes that would take place. So they're on many different levels. They're not just one, and it's not simple to describe these things. I was told that one of them would be on a spiritual level. Changes would begin to take place. On a physical level, changes would begin. And also on an earth basis, for the earth itself, that changes would happen. So all of these things were sort of being correlated and being written by humanity itself in the path that we are to take. For example, that there were the possibility that war would break out, for example. This is something that really disturbs me. It scares me. It upsets me. And even as I say this, I could cry. Because, and I might just cry.
It's okay. It's okay. Go ahead.
Because if anyone were to have lived the life that I have for the past 20 years, to have had the experience after experience after experience, confirmation after confirmation after confirmation of all of these things, they too would not hesitate in anything to help in whatever way they could to stop this process. Because we have a responsibility. As human beings, I was told that we have a responsibility to do what we can to save this earth. We're not the saviors of the earth. We're supposed to be the caretakers of the earth. We're here to be the stewards of this land. That is part of why we are here, to be able to experience one another and the earth itself. But the way that we are living our lives, based in things like greed as being the primary focus for most people, we've forgotten about why it is that we're supposed to be here to begin with. And that is the beauty of each other and of this land. And one of the things that I always ask people, every single person, and I say to them, you really need to ask yourself this question. Are you happy? It's a very simple question. The answer is what gets very complicated. Because as it was explained to me by these beings, humanity was on a path, a collision course. And if we didn't change it, this was going to be the end result. Destruction. In whatever form. Whether it was going to be a meteor hitting the earth, or whether it was going to be war breaking out, or whether it was going to be famine, or there was going to be earth changes that took place, any of these things. That man had the ability to change this timeline of what it was that was going to be coming. Now, people have said to me, well, you're trying to, create a prophecy, or you're talking about prophecy. But here's the thing. For anyone out there that understands even remotely the smallest amount of this is easy to understand what it is that's happened here. We've been given a gift, a very special gift, and that is the gift of seeing beyond where we currently are. Now, if we stay on the same path, they've said this is going to be the end result. But the gift is, if we can change the course that we have been on, then all of these things will be averted. And they will not happen. So this is the reason for the book. This is the reason that I've come forward. Because I don't want to be talking to you. I really don't. I wish I could put on mask and not be here. But I am, because in my heart, in my mind, in my entire being, I know that we are on a path that is frightening. And some people get scared. I'm not scared. These tears are not fear. These tears are very much sadness, because I have seen the future through them with their assistance. So I hope that we will be able to come together as humanity to change that. And I believe that we still can. I don't think that it's possible at this point in time to stop everything. I think that we have come to a time where it has become apparent, and is becoming more apparent every day, that we are on a collision course in many different areas. Our food supplies have, in the course of the last year, become scarce in certain areas in the world. Things like rice, mad cow disease, the avian flu, the list goes on. These things are all becoming apparent to everyone in the world. Fuel. The cost of fuel, gas prices affecting everyone in the world. But all of these things can be changed very easily. And that is how we are going to change the earth, with helping one another.
Okay, so you have a mission, and you're on your mission, and here we are. This is October, actually not October, this is September of 2008,
yes.
Right? And it's a beautiful world outside my door today. However, there are a lot of things going on right now as we speak. The American economy is going in the tank. There is possible war with Iran right, behind our backs, could be happening, could be gearing up. And there are other things as well. So how is this impacting your sense of what you're doing, what your set, sort of your set mission, and what the next milestones are, if you will, that you're planning to get to?
That's, considering that this is 2008, it's a very interesting question for me, because it has been, I don't even know how many years, and I don't even know if it relates back to 1988, but at some point in this course of my life, in the last 20 years, 2008 has been a year that has stuck with me, because I have known for years that between August of 2008 and November 2008 that there would be major changes on the earth. And what I mean is, I'm not talking about changes of the earth itself, but of the people, and maybe in some form it would have something to do with the United States. Now, I made this very public statement in January of this year. I said that these things were coming and that they would involve the United States, and what the United States did and what happened here would affect the entire world forever. So considering that the American economy is doing as it is, and the price of oil that does have to do with the United States in part, we are at the beginning of a flow that is not going to be easily rectified, if at all. So what people need to understand is that these things were told to me years and years and years ago. And so what I'm saying is 2008, there's going to be economic repercussions across the earth that are never going to be fully recovered. So that's the first change. I've also seen that there are the possibilities of changes taking place on a global scale, of things that are more geared towards the political structure of the earth in the next probably 4 to 6 months, that there were going to be some changes that were going to be taking place around this time. So that finishes off 2008. It's like a precursor to what's to come. Now, the other year that I'm concerned with, and I've had great concern over since 1988, is not 2012, as people have often asked me. 2012 to myself, in the knowledge that I've been given by these beings, is not a specific date for me to be even thinking about. However, the year 2010 is. So what is coming in 2010? I'm often asked this. And all I know is that there is the potential of great destruction all over the earth. Can I say that that's war? No, I will not say that. Can I say that it is a meteor coming? I cannot say that. What I am saying is that humanity has a role to play in how this turns out in 2010. So let's say that 2010 rolls around and nothing happens. You know what? I am not going to sit here and say, oh, I was wrong. I am going to be clapping in glee that we have averted what it is that I have seen for all this time. So it is never too late. The 11th hour is going to be the 11th hour until the moment that it happens. So we always have time. We always have the ability to change something. And I believe that from all of this knowledge that I've learned and all of these things that have been shown to me, I know that we have the ability to work together to make changes on the earth that are going to be lasting, that will bring back the happiness and joy that we came here to be able to experience, that will put a structure in place for our families and our communities that is geared towards caring for one another and for the earth itself. And this particular time that we're in right now is critical, that we begin to understand that we need to take responsibility on an individual basis, that we as individuals do have the power to change the earth in a way that is going to be beneficial to our children, in a way that is going to be beneficial to the people that are coming after us. And people ask me, why is it and what is it that makes this time special? And it is because we are being given the choice of how our path is going to lead us and take us and where the end is going to be. If we decide that we are going to continue to be greed-filled, look into the future. It doesn't take much. You can see that there's no real way out of this situation that we're in unless we make some changes. So how do we do that? How do we make changes? And I tell people, very important. People that come here to Project Camelot, it's a prime example. It's called education. The most important thing that an individual can do is educate themselves. And I am not talking just about political issues or issues that have to do with extraterrestrials, but I'm talking about educate yourself as to who you are as a person. Educate yourself to how to live, how to build a home, how to grow food. Put your hands in the earth again so that you remember who you are, so that you remember where your food came from. That's education. It's talking about educating yourself in all the areas that you need, spiritually, emotionally, physically. Look at how you're living, the choices that you're making. No one, including myself, are perfect. No one's perfect. But what we can do is when we are able to, we can make the right choices so that slowly we can make a world that is on the right path.
Okay, so you've come here, though, to Hopi land and Sedona and the Four Corners, and the mission is to gather the people,
yes,
if I understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not just the Native American people. And can you talk about that a little?
I am going to share with you a little bit of what was told to me 20 years ago. When I was on board the craft, what I was told was to find the others like myself, to gather them together and bring them back to the safe lands. That a time would come when all of these people, meaning the people that I saw living from the, taken from the third world into the fourth world, and as well as the others, quote, like myself, that we would all come back together. And when this happened, there would be great changes that would take place on the earth for the better. So it is becoming clearer and clearer to me by the day now. See, it used to take years for things to come. And that's no longer the case. And that's a very key point. Because people have noticed that the world and the daily lives that they have, everything's changing. The way that we think, the way that we act. Some people are just seem to be floating through life while other people are just sort of going crazy. And they can't seem to hold their own selves and their own space. What's happening now is that this gathering that I was told about 20 years ago is beginning to form. And the people like myself there are people all over the earth that have had experiences similar to mine. And we are all waiting for the right time to stand up in unity, and come forward and speak to the world. Because when the world realizes that we are here, and that we are strong, and that we have been working in our own individual ways to better the earth and to better our societies, I believe that they will not have a choice but to look around and say, okay, what do we need to do? Because we aren't crazy people. People like myself are living very normal lives. And as I state in the book, we could be your best friend or your neighbor. We could be the principal at the school. We could be, we could be your governor or anything in life. You could even be married to somebody like me, and you may not know. But when the time comes, all of us will stand up together and come out of these closets that we've been living in to make our presence known on a global scale. So when people talk about this time where they're constantly asking me, oh, are these beings going to show themselves to us? Are they going to come out on a global scale? I tell them that it is my understanding that these tall blonde beings are here as the caretakers of this earth, and that they will not show themselves on a global scale, en masse, unless it is absolutely necessary to do so. Meaning, if there was some great cataclysm that was coming where the entire world would be wiped out, that they would then step in. But it is only then that they would do so. Now, we, people like myself, are the ones that could come out on a global basis and a global scale. And this is one of the questions I've been asked so many times, and this is a really important point for people to understand, that when they say they're going to come out, well, yeah, we're going to come out. We're going to come out of your homes and out of your schools and out of your political arenas and out of your preschools as your teachers. That's where we're going to come out first.
And doesn't it also, there's a really key ingredient which involves the children, and that the gatherings are actually going to send sort of a wave across the planet that's going to impact and stimulate all of the indigo children and all of the, crystal children, whatever you want to call them, and they will suddenly know that the time is now because of this gathering, if I understand it.
You do understand it very well, and it is important to note that also. When these gatherings take place, and they have been, one can say that these gatherings have been taking place all over the earth already, in small forms. What the great gathering is certain individuals, certain groups coming together of prominence, and of a prominence meaning nothing more than having certain knowledge. So people all over the earth with certain knowledge will come together, and when they stand together, they will say certain things. And what it's going to do is it's going to send a message out to individuals, children, to young adults, to those people that are 70 years old. But it will send a message to everyone that's waiting. We all feel it. Everyone's felt it for a very long time. What are we waiting for? And it's like sitting in a chair getting all jittery. What are we waiting for? We're waiting for something. One of the things that they're waiting for is for this event to take place. That's what I believe, because that's what I was told 20 years ago, that it would be a wave that would sort of go out to these individuals and almost send a message to them, say, okay, you're not alone. Let's wake up together and let's start standing up and be known en masse to the earth, because then there will be responsibility taken by individuals. But it will also mean that those people that are living in their homes in fear of coming out, that as we come out together, we will no longer be ridiculed by people, but we will have individuals saying, okay, teach me a little bit more about this path that you're on, because there's more than one side to this phenomenon. And I'm not here to talk to people or educate them about this darker side. What I'm saying is that this knowledge, this path, this understanding that I have from these tall blondes is truly about enlightening ourselves, to educating ourselves, to helping us to understand who we are and where we're from. And there is no hidden agenda. We may not have all of the answers. I may not have all of the answers. But if you put me in a room with a number of other people, we do have the whole picture. So to say that there's other things going on is not a fair assessment in my view. So it's important for all of us to come together to the earth en masse, and that will be happening, I hope, very soon.
Okay, now we have time for you to ask your question, and then we can also double back and cover some ground that we might have missed along the way.
I have a question which many people who are watching this will probably want me to ask, and that is that when you talk about the four worlds that were mentioned both by your extraterrestrial contacts and are present in the Hopi legend in the same form, can you match that against the traditional scientific thinking in terms of the fossil record, the evolution of man? Can you put any kind of a date on this? What does this actually mean to a paleontologist or an anthropologist? Are you able to answer that question, or is it just not known?
That is an interesting question to me, because the way that I can explain this is that when I was on board the craft, I was given knowledge it was like saying that I had an education in many areas, okay? One of the areas was on the evolution of man and where we came from, where we're going. So in this, it was as though I went to, let's say, grade 3 or grade 4. So I have only a little bit of knowledge about these different worlds. I am not the expert, but I know that there's others like myself out there who would have far greater in-depth knowledge concerning this question. What became very clear to me in the visions that I was shown on this screen was that, for example, in the beginning, they said that it was like they threw the seeds of life across the land and waited for life to form, and nothing happened. So we were just, you know, like worms in mud. This is the image that came into my mind.
So that's billions of years ago.
Yes, yes. In the second world, I was shown in the second world that this very grotesque life form was produced, and that they waited for it to evolve to see if it would be the right host for this spark of life. In whatever you would like to call it, I call it the spark of life, for this to be able to facilitate a spiritual life and a greater understanding of the universe. But this, in the second world, the life that was formed was very, very simple, is the word that came to me. It was very simple and basic and just really did not evolve. So for myself, when I look at that, of course, when I came back from this experience, and it took me a while to even be able to put all of this, associate it to the world, I clearly was able to see that this was the dinosaur age. Then in the third world, I was shown from above the earth, and then again into this room where these people were that were taken from the third world and brought into this world. And when I was shown from above, what I saw was this city that was very, very much filled with light. So there were cities, but they weren't all over the earth. They were just sort of in pockets here and there. And so when I myself, as Miriam, look back through history at this, I see it as being some of these lost worlds that have been looked for, and some of them, part of them, found over the course of our lifetimes or over the last 100 years. So these three worlds that were talked about prior to this one, it makes very clear sense to me in my limited knowledge of anthropology and paleontology and all of the rest of it. It just looks clear to me that these were the different worlds.
Okay. My next question then that comes from that is that it sounds from what you're saying as if you're talking time scale of the responsibility of the caretakers. I think you call them that word. Other contactees, of course, have called them different terms. Some people call them the watchers. Jim Sparks called them the keepers. These are all approximations, presumably, kind of transposed into our language, for some kind of a guardian race. Maybe that's another term that we could use. But the time scale we're talking about seems to be huge. We're talking about certainly hundreds of millions of years and possibly billions. How advanced are these people? Where are they from? Who are they? Or are they extraterrestrials? Are they time travelers? Are they us in some way, as some people, in my view, compellingly claim? Do you know what the score is here? And what's the relationship between them and the other extraterrestrial races that you must have heard about?
Yes. First of all, I'd like to address the different names, the keepers, the watchers, the caretakers. I call them all of these things myself. And the reason that I do is in part because they are all of these things. They do watch over us. They do take care of us. They are our caretakers, and they keep the knowledge. In my book, I write they are the keepers of the knowledge. that the indigenous people are. They too are the keepers of the knowledge, and so forth. So all of these terms, these different terms that we use to describe them are correct, in my view. The other question was, you know, what kind of a scale are we looking at as far as time is concerned? Now, it is my understanding, again, from what they've shared with me on board that craft, that they have been here since the beginning of the earth, and that they had a hand in creating humanity. That they too, as it was described to me by them, that they too seek to know God, meaning the creator of all that is, all that was, and all that will be. The creator of everything, the very beginning, the source of all things. So they were given a task. It's like saying, you know, whatever your job is, when you get up in the morning and you go to work, that's what your job is. That's what you know that you do. Well, when we are here on earth, it is no different than for them than to say that this is what they do. They are the caretakers of the earth, and this is what they've always done. As far as what timeline they're from, it was also described to me that some of them are from our past, our present, and our future. Because the way that time was described to me, they did have the ability to go back and forth and in the present. They did have that ability. How? You'd have to ask them that, because I have no idea. But they also said that some of them were physical, that they were no different than you or I, that they lived on the earth, that they did live under the earth, inside the earth, that there were others that were interdimensional beings, and there were others on different planets, that all of them were created for the same task in these different areas, and they all had the ability to communicate with one another, and it was like saying that they were cousins. So it's a very complicated question to answer because it is so complicated to explain. It's almost beyond my words to be able to clarify it.
Contact Henry Deacon, who has encountered these situations from a completely different standpoint, working under contract for the American military and American intelligence services, has said that it would take a book of at least 1,000 pages, and he just did not have the energy to write that. Or maybe he said 10,000. Maybe he's not counting. And the impression I got is that this whole backstory is so complex, so deep, so convoluted, almost beyond human understanding, such a backdrop of complexity, that it's like, who are we to try and figure this out? We've actually got our own problems. Anything else is just intellectual curiosity. But the fact is that they're there. At least some of them are caring about us, it would seem. The question I do have, though, linked with what I was just mentioning about the American military and American intelligence services, do you know anything about the possible relationships of this group with the military, or is it a different group of aliens that they have been working with? Do you know anything about that, or is it a question you're unable to answer?
The question is, will I answer? I have not been told anything directly by these beings as to any relationship that was formed with any government or any group on the earth. So let me make that clear. I have not been given any direct information regarding that. They haven't said, yes, we work with these people, we're working over here with that person. However, I have been shown and told certain things that were of a darker side, and warned of certain things. For example, at one point I was shown something it's difficult. It's difficult for me to talk about. I was shown an image of being in an underground base, that what took place there was so dark and ugly and horrifying to me that it was difficult for me to deal with. I don't know how to say this nicely, but it was I saw images of beings and of creatures that were just beyond the human comprehension of being able to see in real life. Now, what happened in this time that I was shown this, I was in the astral, and the being, the tall blonde that I was with, said, "You must be very quiet, because if you're not, they will know that we are here. And don't ever come to this particular area. It is very dangerous for you." And I said, "Okie doke, I'm not going anywhere near there." And so do these tall blondes have associations with certain groups on the planet? No, not that I'm aware of. You asked me about these other beings that so many people are familiar with, which one of the biggest ones is the Greys. I do not have any direct information, but here's what I was told by the tall blondes: that they are here as the caretakers of the earth, and that they would help protect us from ourselves or other things or that we may not be aware of. So does that mean other beings? Absolutely. Does it mean that there's a presence of other beings on the planet? Absolutely. Am I here to talk about those beings with you? No, because I want the message of the tall blondes to be really clear with people that they are here in peace and that they do not mean us any harm. They will not come here and take over the earth. That is not their purpose. If it was their purpose, they would have done it long, long ago. And they do not have a dark agenda in this genetic program that they have going. And I want to talk about that because it's something that's very important to the people of Earth. In the third world, these individuals that were created for the purpose of spiritual development. And when the spiritual development was taking place, all of this knowledge about spirit and life was a part of who we are, where we're from, and where we're going. But again, to reiterate what I've already said, it was like giving children matches. They just didn't deal with it very well. So what has happened since the beginning of our existence as humanity is that different families all over the earth have been given this certain genetic information in our genome, right? And along the way, certain families are, quote, monitored by these caretakers, not to do anything dark, but to help so that very slowly these vessels that we are living in, that we are a part of, have the ability to withstand this greater information and knowledge. Because, of course, our brain is nothing more than a computer that is based on an electrical charge within the body. So if we are overloaded with electrical charges, we will not be able to control the pathways in which this information is flowing, and we become crazy. So these families have very slowly had their DNA, new strands of DNA, to help facilitate greater understanding, greater knowledge, greater respect for ourselves and the earth. And that's what's happened with these families that are being monitored. So that is also why sometimes people have had these things running in their families, because they're one of these families that have been monitored. And that's why the path leading back to where we all came from would be very interesting, to be able to look at the family tree of some of these families through time. So
isn't this this is actually, the Greys are in a sense working for, at least one faction, are working for the tall blondes, or however you want to call them. Because you're talking about also in your 88 experience, you have the 4-foot tall beings. Those were, I assume, the Greys, showing you onto the ship, and at which time you were, meeting with the tall blondes. So what happens is the Greys are actually handling the genetic sort of manipulation under the direction of perhaps these higher beings.
Only to a certain degree, and there needs to be some clarification there. And this is one of the things that I've myself have been very frustrated with in regard to the whole phenomenon, is the terms that we use in order to describe what it is that we're talking about. When, for example, when I myself say the word gray, the first thing that pops into my mind is a being that has wrinkled skin, has just the whole energy of fear for me personally. They have their heads are larger, but they're not huge. Their eyes are slightly slanted, that sort of thing. When I'm talking about the Greys that I'm talking about, if you wanted to call them that, these are 4 feet high with round black eyes and almost look like robots. There's no features to them whatsoever. They're very androgynous. These other Greys with the wrinkled skin, and they kind of, their little tiny noses, those are a completely different breed. So there needs to be clarification in that. Here's what I tell people also. There is something that needs to be said about the understanding of people out there when someone such as myself comes forward. When we talk to you about our experiences, we talk to you about them not only from what it is that we've experienced, but also from our perceptions, understanding, and how much we were taught by them. So this is very important, because if 5 people witness a car accident, all 5 people are going to tell a slightly different story. So the question is the person telling the story a story maker? Are they somebody that, embellishes? You have to take that into account. Is the person a very fastidious storyteller where they're telling every detail? You have to take a look at the individual also to be able to know how to take that story. So when it comes to these beings, I've also been told by certain individuals that these, quote, Greys have been seen with the tall blondes and that their agenda is very dark. But here's what I say. And again, this really needs to be having some clarification out there regarding this phenomenon. I pray that if there are these beings, I would ask these people watching to ask themselves this. I pray that if there are caretakers that are looking over us and watching over us, and if they are somehow related to God in any way, shape, or form, that they not judge me on the evil people of this earth, because we all look the same. Our general descriptions are the same. So because I am white, I pray that I am not judged by the evil of other white people. So when you come across one of these beings, whether it is in your dreams, which they can come to you in, or whether it is in the astral, which means your light body is leaving you, or whether it is physical, ask yourself this, right from here. Do I have fear, or am I simply just afraid? Do I have fear or terror? Because if you have terror, you need to understand that, and you need to say, no, I am not going to do this. I am not going to participate. I do not and will not be a part of this.
Right. They need to protect themselves, and they have this power.
Yes.
And they need to know they have this power.
Yes.
And that's a very important message.
Yes, it is very important. Yeah. People forget that. They say, oh, I don't have any control. I don't have any power. You do have a certain amount of power regarding this phenomenon when you're having contact. And so it is really important to protect yourself in that way, mentally. And that's why, again, these tall blondes make it very clear that we need to educate ourselves not only in what's happening around us in the world, but also on a more spiritual level. Because the more spiritually aware you become, the stronger you become, the more informed as to how it is that you can move forward spiritually and in the astral and in the dreams to be able to protect yourself from some of these other beings. All of them, all of the beings that are out there, whether it be grays or tall blondes, each one that I meet individually, I make them look at me in my eyes. I make them look so that if they're looking at me and they're looking all over the place like this, I say, no, no, no. I remember one dream in particular. The two blondes came to me and they were trying to give me this very, very strong message. And I said to them, you need to look at me. And they said, there's no time, there's no time. And I said, no, you either stop and look at me so that I can look in your eyes, or I'm not speaking to you. So I looked in their eyes and I recognized them as being peaceful and from the right heart. Because you can't look at someone at their, the rest of their body. When we want to know who someone is, even in this world, we stop and we look at their eyes. Can I look at their eyes and be comfortable? We have instant recognition as to whether or not we care for someone or not. So use that in this phenomenon as well. And if you do not want this happening, tell them and just keep telling them that you do not and are not a willing participant, and you demand that they stop. And you need to verbalize that. Will it stop? I don't know. It depends on your spirit. It depends on how strong you are.
Okay, thank you very much for that. That's very important, and I'm glad we can put that out there.
What I would like to share with everyone is that people like myself all over the earth are being stirred to movement. And that stirring and that movement, I believe, is very relevant for every single human being on the earth. I believe that because we are being awakened to begin sharing this information with people, that there are great changes that are coming, and that we need to all understand that. What is this great knowledge? The knowledge is that we're not alone, that we're being watched, that what we're doing is being looked upon by other beings that do have a certain amount of knowledge that we ourselves do not have. And that we need to take responsibility for ourselves. Only as the individual. You're not responsible for the earth. You're responsible for yourself. Accept that. Because we are all being awakened, we are all making the connections with one another. Where this will all lead, I believe that all of us are waiting to see. Because nothing is for sure. We're writing this plan as we're going through it. One of the greatest concerns that I have in the views, the visions that I was shown, the information that was shared to me on board that craft, they talked to me a lot when I was with them about seeds. And I'm always trying to share this information with people. One of the things that could save this earth is seeds. Because if every individual on the planet planted a small garden, we would not have to produce as much oil or transportation or pollution or plastics to, everything. It would also give every individual on the planet a taste again, a glimpse of why we're here, to be able to experience the beauty around us. Now, I'm going to ask everyone to take away from this whole interview today, if they educate themselves on any one thing, I'm going to ask them to educate themselves on what is happening to the Earth's seeds. Because it is of great concern to these tall blondes, and always has been, And even for myself, what I have learned in the last few years regarding seeds and what's happening on the earth, it is the greatest concern that every individual should have. If you accept that we're not alone, that's great. But educate yourself on seeds, because it will change your view in the world, and it will change the course of this earth for the better.
Wonderful. Okay, that's a very different take than you generally hear, and I think there's a lot of wisdom there in that approach. You don't even need free energy if you just plant a garden, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
I wanted to share something else.
Okay.
You asked me a question. You asked me a question regarding something that was given to me. Mm-hmm. And I know that anyone watching this is going to be going back to that, right, because it's very important.
Yeah.
When I was on board the craft in 1988, I had memories come back to me from childhood that were very interesting, because it was of a time when I was a very young child, about 4 or 5 years old, when I was taken on board a craft. And this memory came back to me very, very clearly. So I really get into the details of this in the book, because it is a key point to this phenomenon for myself. Now, to take this story and put it into a few sentences, I was taken on board a craft when I was 4 years old, and during that time these beings gave me something, and they told me to bury it, and they said that one day I would know what it was for and that I would go back and find it. I get asked this all the time because I've written about it in great detail throughout the course of my life. Mm-hmm. This thing keeps coming up over and over and over again. I have not found it yet. I know the area that it is in, but I have not found it yet. The question again is it my imagination? Absolutely not. Because I have had far too many confirmations of this information given to me over the years. One in particular coming back to me 35 years after the fact, 36 years after the fact. And a very clear indication that these memories that came back were absolutely crystal clear. So, is it there? I believe it is. Have I found it? No, I haven't. Will I let you know if I have? I think the world will know if I have. The path that I've been on for the last few years of my life, since 2003, have, in a very roundabout way, been my driving force. And this object is constantly in my mind. And what I've noticed is, since 2003 to the present day, the images of it have become clearer and clearer and clearer. So does that mean it's coming back to me? Does that mean it's physically coming back to me? I believe it is. So I think we'll all, including myself, because I live this life, because it is so profound every day, even for me, and because of the things that I've experienced in the past, I am no different than anyone else out there. I'm waiting to see what happens next.
Well, thank you very much, Miriam. I call you Miriam Blue Star, and there's a significance to the blue star that you haven't mentioned. Would you like to talk about that briefly?
Yes. The blue star is a prophecy of the Hopi people, and again, I do not speak on behalf of Hopi. However, when I was on the craft in 1988, they told me that one day a star would appear in the sky for all of man to see. Nothing or no one would hide its presence from the world, and it would be a sign to the people that the end is near and it is time to prepare. In 2003, when I went through Hopi and I went back home, I then went online and I started looking up the Hopi, trying to gather information about them. And it was then that I found the Hopi prophecy, which is identical as well as the creation myth to the information that was given to me regarding the Hopi people. So the blue star is a prophecy of the Hopi people, and I was told that the star would appear exactly the same as the Hopi. So what I would ask is that you do your own research regarding these people and all the indigenous people around the world. It will give you great insight and spiritual understanding.
But there was a blue star in the sky not so long ago. We were driving through New Mexico at the time, and people were commenting on it. You don't actually know if that was the blue star, is that right?
Because the blue star is a prophecy of the Hopi people, I cannot say for sure whether or not that was the blue star. But that was a comet that blew up. It was it's called 17P/Holmes, if you wanted to look it up. It will give you more information. And this was a comet that astounded researchers and astronomers because of what happened as a result of it. It blew up and it was showing blue in the sky all over the earth. It was very, very clear at that time, yes.